So the floor is open to questions or comments even. If you want to point it to any particular person, you can, to Lynn. And you could just give it to me and maybe several of us could compare and give some answers. Yes?
Oh, I'd like to address my question to this couple.
Okay.
Usually people say you emphasize social changes. You have enacted, when you first started up, acted social change to really along with a first non-government.
At that time, it was no person, yes.
So now what is the social changes that focus social change you do?
Well, we have our individual areas of activism. Like I'm involved with an environmental justice group, and Rosie's very involved with anti-nuclear work, as well as a lot of other things which she'll be glad to talk about. But we don't do things as a group so much as embodying these ideals in the way we live. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. We don't require people, we're not a political party, we're not a church. We don't require that kind of agreement on a single set of ideals. What we agree more on is the way we work together to support each other. That's kind of what we're trying to say.
Part of our agreements involve nonviolent communication. So, and we try to study that as a group. But I would say that, yeah, we wouldn't let somebody in who was wanting to do the opposite. So the nonviolence, social action type stuff, anybody's welcome to do any of that.
So now, if somebody who wants to go into your group and work with the government, work with the CIA,
It depends. It really depends. No, the establishment is not, we're not against the establishment or the people in the establishment, but we're for creating a better future for everybody.
Through policy. Through policies or the institutions itself, or it would depend on the actions portrayed by that particular individual, it seems like.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, in our Quaker meetings, we have had to deal with that very issue. There was somebody who was working on the Bangor base, planning for the transportation of nuclear weapons, and they want to become a Quaker. Well, we wrestled with that for quite a while, and we did eventually admit them, and then after they'd been a member for a while, they realized that their philosophy really didn't fit with ours, and they left. But we honestly took on, looking at the values deeply and seeing, do we connect well, as part of the concluded that we did. And then, it was they who decided that they didn't really fit after all. Does that make sense?
have you people have?
Oh, yeah.
I had several interviews, and everyone in the house has a chance to say, I get this feeling, I mean, I like what they're saying, but I get this feeling that I don't want to live with them, and that's it.
So I have two questions. The first is, what has been, for each of your communities, been this contentious agreement that you worked on? And the second is, how have your communities talked about and enacted racial justice in the context of your community?
So you want to say out on either one?
I can tell you the most contentious thing we ever had.
Okay.
It was about whether the Christmas tree could stay in the common house between one person's party and another person's party 3 days later. Or whether it would have to be removed. You cannot believe the amount of...
I can't believe you even had a Christmas tree.
We all three use our common areas, but not they use for common purposes.
The one common house?
Oh, yes, we
Okay.
all do our parties and things there.
Okay.
We don't have big houses, we have little houses.
Mhm.
And we all entertain our own friends there. We have meals, anywhere from 3 to 5 times a week. And we have a meeting twice a month. We have a meeting of different sizes. And the rest of them are pretty small meetings, they go in the small meeting room. But otherwise, you sign up if you want to sponsor something, and this was happening to be.
And you can decorate it however you want.
Oh,
for your party.
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. We have a couple of rules. We don't leave any liquor in the common house because of just being aware of children and things like that. So, but basically, most of the time it doesn't matter. If the children have a Halloween party on Friday night and we're going to have a dinner on Sunday night, we can leave the Halloween pumpkins up. But this was all over whether a Christmas tree, which was decorated with hand crocheted Ukrainian little hangings. There were no Christian things, no nothing in it. But that didn't matter. We had people it's been about 5-6 years ago. But now, if anybody wants a Christmas tree for their party, they will take it away when their party's over and put it somewhere and bring it back out to another party if somebody else wants it. That's just an example of
Most contentious and perhaps most absurd.
Well, I would say it's the most
I know,
absurd of the
yes,
contentious.
right.
There have been some other contentious things, but that one is a good example of how something that some people would put no stock in at all,
Yeah.
but could be very, very important to other people.
Are there other examples of most contentious, since we're on that? Anybody have
I just wonder if there, if you translate contentious into, or reword it as difficult, I imagine that there are some things that take more meetings to work out. For myself, for my community, we don't have much disharmony. The only thing that I can think of that was contentious is a decision, a proposal to cut down some trees in order to free up sunlight for more garden area. Some people said, don't touch the trees, don't kill the trees, and so we were, that was, that still hasn't been resolved.
Yeah.
Trees are still growing, but the sun's still shining.
Anyone else?
Sure. So one thing that has come up a number of times in the time that I've been at Sherwood is something that we kind of have to start thinking about every winter, which is after our summer, where we have a porch that has couches on it, and so we love hanging out on the couches. It's really awesome. And then winter comes around, and then there's some people who don't have homes, and they see our porch, and they see a couch, and they see that as a place where they can, spend the night. And so when we've, encountered people on our porch, there's been, a lot of feelings around it. But one sentiment is this is something that is there, it's available, they seem to be choosing it, and they may need it, and feeling like that should be allowed. And then there's also a very strong sentiment and actually a point of unity at our house around the idea of safe space and around comfort. So when people have come home and encountered someone on the couch, that's been one thing. Maybe that does go into your comfort zone a little bit, but then there's been issues with at times people in the house getting some harassment from the person who's sleeping on the porch, and so we've had to basically kind of negotiate these feelings of like, well, this is perhaps a survival situation for this person, and then also reconcile it with I should feel safe in my own home, and I don't need to be harassed when I walk up my front porch to go home, so I need to feel safe. And ultimately, what we've ended up deciding on in the last few, in the time I've been at Sherwood, we need to prioritize feelings of safety in our house. So it's a hard thing, but if if we do encounter someone, we try to provide them with resources, of local, homeless shelters and places they can get something to eat. And that's kind of the best that we've come up with, but it's certainly been a contentious issue. Yeah.
We want to have more questions too.
Sure.
I know.
Right, so
Let's take one comment on this. Racial justice.
Racial
for sure.
justice issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I volunteer for racial justice organizations, so I have a lot of feelings about this. Our household, actually, I think we've done fairly well in terms of our own racial mix without trying to, in a sense. Because on the one hand, we obviously don't have racial qualifications. When we're interviewing people, we take whoever we think will fit with the house. And so over the years, we have had people, quite a variety of racial backgrounds, half black, half white, twice, African American, Asian American. We've got somebody who's currently half Asian and half Hispanic. So on the one hand, we haven't been recruiting. On the other hand, we're not afraid to talk about racial issues either. Bring things up openly. And the African American man came home a couple of times complaining about people in the neighborhood who had been harassing him. So I immediately jumped up and went out to investigate. I think that had an effect on him, seeing that he wasn't alone and facing problems. We definitely uphold a racially equal society. We try to act as if we already are one, without performing the kind of dance, won't you come join us kind of thing. Where people feel like they're being tokenized, being brought in as, to try to shade the color of the house, or turn it down a notch, whatever. We don't do that, but at the same time, being open in the way we are,
And standing for the things that you do.
right,
In your
the
actions.
kind of people that we want do tend to come our way. That's my response.
Thanks. Okay, a couple other questions. Yes?
3 questions, one for this guy here from Sherwood, and one for Lady Clearwater, and one for the director. For Pat from Sherwood, you mentioned the Evergreen Land Trust. What is
Yeah.
that?
Okay, so the Evergreen Land Trust is an organization that's been around for, I can't tell you exactly how long it's been around, but
More than 20 years.
Yeah, it's been decades. What it is an organization of multiple properties, some of which are urban, and some of which are in rural Washington. It's a mechanism, kind of,
It's a nonprofit.
Right.
So it has board of trustees.
Sure. But in effect, what's happening is it's a way to legally take property off the market and kind of create a set of rules of how that property is going to be kind of used,
Yeah.
and ideally in perpetuity. So the Evergreen Land Trust has all kinds of ideals, but would probably be characterized best by this idea that these, at least in the rural places, these wild places need to be preserved, and they need to be managed in a sustainable and kind of green way. I think that in the city, it looks like we want, Sherwood, for example, to always be a place that is run as like an intentional community, and that operates in a way that would, ideally work toward being a very accessible place financially for people to live in community. So that's a couple of examples.
So can I add one thing?
Sure, yeah.
Just to differentiate from other housing land trusts where it's just to help people get home ownership, or greenbelt sorts of land trusts where it's just being preserved land. This is a specific intentional community, self-managed properties that are part of the Evergreen Land Trust. It's sort of a passive entity that just takes it under the care of long-term, what would you say, stewardship And so that it's not held by one owner or a couple of people who decide to sell it off and disrupt the intentional community living of everyone else who's there. It's that only for other properties. Okay, and we might.
Okay, you can skip the rest of my questions, so.
Okay, is there another question? Otherwise, we can direct one more to Shauna. You had a question that was for her?
Yeah, my brother has.
Okay, you get two. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. You mentioned shares in your LLC. What do you mean by that, like fund shares?
Well, there, at this point, it will eventually be also a condominium, and we'll each own little pieces of our individual units. But right now, the LLC, which is a limited liability corporation, owns the land. And so, in order to have a stake in it, you buy a share in it.
Like your
You become an owner or a member of the LLC. And, I mean, we set, how much we'd like from people to contribute to become members of the LLC. And then once we file our condominium documents, which will be soon, then pieces will be given over to, people who are members, and then it will stop being an LLC and become a condominium.
So it's like a company for right now.
Yeah.
And for the director, everybody here on the panel live in communities that are kind of like multi-funded. Each individual kind of goes out into the workaday world of everyday life, goes to a job or personally, maybe they're self-employed or they have a little shop somewhere. You guys have this bookstore here, so that has to be cooperatively managed and run. But I was just wondering if there was ways, or if you knew, or anyone on the panel knew of other communities that have intentional businesses that people work together, eat together, live together, that kind of thing, and support the community through a cooperative effort at making money.
I just think it's it.
Well, what comes to mind is more rural properties than urban, but there's one that I mentioned earlier, Emma Golden Finishing School, and although they don't, as a whole, all work at home, they, mostly go out and do some jobs. Some of them do work from home, and they all share income so that they can be home as much of the time, really, as they choose. And then there are other properties, mostly in the they are also one of the member organizations in the Federation of Egalitarian Communities. And I used to live in one that was called Twin Oaks. It's in Virginia. And everybody just worked on the farm property. Nobody had a job. We had to go off the farm to earn income and then come back. So we just ran multiple businesses, did the things that we need to upkeep, our own buildings and take care of the kids and do the laundry and grow some of the food, but we obviously had other businesses and worked in the, U.S. economy and had dollars so that we could buy other food and things that we needed, supplies to keep our vehicles running and build the buildings that we did and pay electricity bills. So they're out there, and you should look online at theic.org, and there's a blue half sheet back there if you want to look at resources. There's just a range of all sorts of different types of economic, political, social arrangements in communities. So.
Thank you all for your.
Thank you for your questions too. Yes, back here.
I'm wondering if there's a turnover problem, how stable your communities are. People are constantly leaving or staying for a long period.
Well, there is transition, but how much do you define it a problem is one thing, because we want to have the freedom for people to make life choices to come and go. And any one of you want to talk about when it's been a problem or a challenge, like, in ways that,
Sure.
Yeah, you go first.
Okay, Morningstar has had quite a few people come and go. We just kind of alluded to that briefly. And sometimes it's a problem, sometimes it isn't. We've had stretches where we've had an empty bedroom for months at a time. And that strains people's finances, because as we mentioned, the individual costs go up when that happens. I really can't explain it. It's just the chemistry of the group. We've had a couple of occasions where the chemistry of the group is so wonderful. It's just going to go on forever. And then all of a sudden, somebody decides to move to Australia. What can you do?
It's, when it's And when it's less than that, that's more disruptive, because then you have to find a new person. But it seems like the majority of people who have moved on from our house have like learned lessons and stuff, and then they're going to go out and do something more fun for them or better or whatever, go on. So it's okay.
And we retain a lot of ties with our former housemates too, so it's not like a divorce.
Right.
Thank you.
Did you want to comment? Was that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So, I was, kind of touching on how people often find Sherwood at a stage in their life where they're not necessarily thinking about settling down for the long run. And so what that kind of amounts to is a fairly high degree of turnover, and at times that has been viewed as like this issue and how can we help fix this issue. I think that some of the challenges that come with it are things like, there's people's names on bank accounts and someone has to, we are a nonprofit corporation, so there has to be people who are the president and other officers of our corporation, which for us is meaningless, but we have to have the names on a piece of paper. So when people move out, we just have to make sure that things get updated, and the person on the, I think that just a couple years ago we had to change the person on the phone account who had left years before that. And so there's issues like that, and there's also issues of passing down institutional knowledge, because you have all these things that are working the way that they work, and then maybe in a year half the group has changed. So we've tried to develop ways of effectively passing along, what we've learned and how things are kind of functioning. And kind of it's been a little bit miraculous, I think, that it's gone as smoothly as it has, with people sometimes staying a year or two, and then that's that. But we generally are able to fill rooms pretty quickly when people leave, because there is a demand to live in such a situation as ours.
So one of the things about visitors and transition is that, of course, it's sad when someone leaves and they have a role or several roles they were filling, and the institutional knowledge and just friendships, and familiarity. But when a new person comes in, of course, it's costly to, emotionally, just with time, and if you have a room that's empty and it's costing everybody a little bit more, it's difficult to search for the right person. But if you find a person that really fits, then it's such an infusion of joy and the new gifts that they bring and the new learning that happens. So in a way, it's kind of juicy to have turnover. So I just wanted to say that side of it, David, you have a question?
Partly a question, partly a statement. Having lived in Winnetonka housing community, there are two things that I remember very vividly happening. When we were trying to sell a unit, we had visitors coming to the place that was under construction. You didn't get everybody from wannabes, be part of the community, to people who were just curious, other people who just think it's kind of weird, I actually had a conversation with a woman with obviously mainstream thinking, and she said, I don't know about all these people living close to each other. I wouldn't want my children to go into somebody else's house, and I don't know. That's well, you fully expect that to happen. Right. And the other thing I wanted to reflect on about turnover is that even people who bought into the community, who bought a home there, a few of them found over time that they really weren't what they wanted. They needed a lot more privacy than they realized they were going to get. And when we had that turnover, and somebody else came in, they chose themselves by having been there. That is juiciness. When you find the right person, they find you.
So the two that
I was
have
wondering if you've had those kind of experiences in the community, or something like that.
And also, with how does a person get chosen? Do you have, in your community, you mentioned at the very, very introductory statement that you've had very little turnover, but do they is it simply at Jackson Place that if they can afford to take over the mortgage payments, is that it, or there's some screens?
No, we make sure that people do understand what co-housing is about. Before we let them sign on, before they can join the
Okay.
business we're forming, they had to come to at least 3 meetings to make sure that they understood.
Okay, so
what
with
was
the full
involved.
community, it's not
Yeah.
just dealing with that person who's selling their unit.
But now that we are already built, for a long time, we had a right of first refusal, so that the governing board, the association, would have first choice, 15 days to select from applicants who might want to come there. We had to get rid of that because of financing problems that they won't finance anything that has that thing, so we had to change our bylaws to get rid of that. So now, we still make sure that people we do the best we can to make sure they understand what co-housing is about. We usually have gone quite a few times to things. However, they sign the documents, they understand that they're buying into what we've already decided.
Right, every
Sometimes
policy
it's
that's
true.
been made.
They may find that they didn't realize the intensity of the interaction, even though people have the perfect opportunity to be perfectly separate if they want to. They don't have to go anywhere, but they don't want to go except to meetings.
Do you have a minimum requirement of committees, serving on committees?
We expect them.
You expect them, it's not
It's
required.
always within their process. We expect them to either be on committee or to do one of the jobs that that committee is going to be doing, and to take turns being officers and meetings and things like that. We have to make sure they understand that expectation. That doesn't mean that they always are able to carry it out. They may suddenly find themselves pregnant with twins, like one of our
Yep.
Not like
Drop out your committee work.
And some of those things happen.
For a while.
We understand
Okay.
that happens.
Okay. And Larry, what screens are there? If someone wants to join your community, do you want to talk about, is there a process?
In our case, because of the spiritual focus of our community, it depends a lot on their involvement with our larger church activities. And it's a process, not so much of getting to know who they are personally, but is their life orientation in the direction of meditation and spiritual path strong? If it is, then
And is it up to a board of people, or everybody who lives together, or one person makes a decision? or-
It's a fluid thing. The people more involved in leading the community ministers tend to have more insight and more.
But it would be a set of a couple of different meetings or something. It sounds like not just one visit or
Thanks
application.
very much. I'd like to.
We should probably wrap up. I don't know if
We should wrap up. I would like to ask, how many people here are currently living in an intentional community? Panel accepted.
Okay.
So, raise it again, so 3 or 4. Do you want to say where you're from?
Well, I'm a new member. I've been here about 5 weeks or so at Bright Morning Star. And I have to say that I feel very blessed that I just happened to, I was planning on moving to Seattle and I just got on Craigslist and I saw their ad and I called them immediately and it was a fit. And I feel so lucky. That's all I can say.
Introduce yourself?
Oh,
Yes.
I'm from Sandaya
Yes.
in Bothell.
Yes. On the co-housing community.
Do you feel lucky?
You have 3 minutes to answer the question.
Yes, I do. I do have a lot of friends there, and a lot of stuff goes on, but it's a kind of a great big family, and.
Have you been there since the beginning?
And,
Or how long have you lived there?
Since 2000, since we're on our 10th year. So we'll have our celebration next year, because this year is so
Right.
crazy.
Right.
So I've been there 10 years.
Thank you.
I live at the Ananda community. And I feel very lucky.
And you feel lucky too. All communitarians agree. They feel lucky.
Are there any others who have lived in communities at some point in the past? Several.
You want to say which?
I was a founding member of the Lopez Community Land Trust, which is also a cooperative, and I helped build the structure on paper, on the board for 4 long, bloody, grim years, and write the grants, and then we formed a homeowners co-op with 7 early adopters, which meant we had lots of meetings.
Yeah.
And our most contentious issue was pets.
Oh, yes.
And 20 years later,
Dog
it's still
issue.
pets.
Yes.
And then I
Or
built a
else
house.
paint color. Paint and pets.
Yeah, it was, you know.